So I want you all to know, recognize, and realize in the seriousness and the tone of my voice, because I also have really sensed some interesting things during this time. The state has just reached the verdict, officially read aloud on the loudspeakers for Mr. Alex Murdaugh. He has been found guilty of first-degree murder and intentional homicide and use of a violent weapon in the commission of an act. He was also found in some of the documentation. I'm still going over some of the write-ups, but he was also found partially guilty in his clear-cut deal with a third party. Third party would obviously be Nathan Tootin, but that's something that will be covered, later on. I'm just letting you know, folks, I'm broadcasting this video now while they are reading the verdict, and it's very shocking to me as well, because 80% of the people who I spoke with and other people in the area, and even in South Carolina, were predicting it would be a hung jury to some extent, or there would be a lot of interesting back and forth. But God works in mysterious ways, and I just want you guys to know, the verdict is in. It has been read aloud. Court paperwork. I have the court paperwork sitting very close to me right now. Alex Murdaugh has been found guilty of the crime of first-degree murder, and it would not have occurred, I fully believe would not have occurred, especially in the way that it did, without going to a hung jury and so on. If it wasn't for you folks, your outstanding support, your truthfulness, and your honesty in the support of my video when I spoke aloud about the two-shooter theory. As you will note in that video, I had decided, based upon evidence that I had seen, also certain forensic evidence which had just been released, that it could not have been possible for the two shooters to have ever been in any kind of a scenario in this situation. And I explained my reasoning. I showed some of the facts. You guys will note in that video of why. That was a very, very profound moment in history for proving once and for all why two shooters most certainly could not have been involved in this. And this is a very momentous occasion. It's also a solemn occasion because I can see, and folks will agree with me in this video later on, you can see the anguish that's really in Mr. Murdaugh's face, for the fact that he knows that he is guilty, and he actually did shoot Paul, and sadly he shot Maggie as well. And he's coming to the realization that no amount of money can ever buy yourself out of the misery, and out of the conditions, folks, as you kind of spoke in some of the earlier comments on these videos, of what it is when you discover your son, and your wife, your family is not ever coming back. And it was partly, if not almost exclusively, by your own hand, the reason why. And so in that way, I feel like that this is going to be a very interesting video when I discuss more about Murdaugh and certain situations around Murdaugh, because it shows you, if you watch the body language very, very carefully, that he knew he had been found out. And that there's a time in your life when you are guilty of a crime and just no amount of money or no amount of solace or peace will come out of trying to do anything about it, you know? And I think he finally got to that point. It is sad in a way, you know, how he had to kind of hang his head in this shame. But again, I want to point to all of you, also to JD the lawyer and many others who have been supporting this, that it's also a great joyous occasion for us, because we knew that he was guilty, and there was a good chance that he would get off, okay? But because we kept pressing on this issue, and because we kept going, you know, to the source of the problem, looking at these issues, and examining especially the two-shooter theory, and similar things, folks, he's been found guilty. And this is a great day for justice. It's a great celebration for justice, with much more to come. Thank you again. And we couldn't have done it without your entire support. Explosive murder trial that has rocked South Carolina's low country for a long time, and audiences across the globe. Netflix has dropped a highly anticipated docu-series which promised a short exploration of the complex web of power, secrets, and suspicion. It ultimately led to the downfall of the local family dynasty. The three-part series centers around the Murdaugh family, which has dominated the legal system in the local area for 100 years, generations of many types of lawyers who not only founded one of the most prominent civil law firms in the area, but also worked with prosecutors in a role known locally as solicitors, affording them connections to law enforcement. As a result, the Murdaugh family legacy is coming crashing down as 54-year-old Richard Alexander Murdaugh, known as Alex Murdaugh, is on trial accused of shooting his wife, Maggie, and adult son, Paul, on June 7, 2021. Since the murders, Mr. Murdaugh, who says he was living with a decades-long opioid addiction, has been disbarred and faces more than 100 other charges in which he is accused of serious financial crimes, including stealing millions from clients. Murdaugh is being charged with insurance fraud and assisted suicide. In relation to what has become known as the roadside incident, in which Murdaugh initially claimed to have been shot in the head by an unknown assailant after pulling over with a flat tire, but which he subsequently told the police in his story the elaborate plot was done in order to have a former client shoot him so that his son, Buster, might be able to collect the $10 million in life insurance. But the cloud of suspicion over the Murdaughs did not begin with the murders of Maggie and Paul. Two suspicious deaths and a fatal boat crash in the preceding years are part of the astonishing story that the Netflix documentary unravels. The docuseries devotes more than half of its airtime to telling the story of Mallory Beach, who died under mysterious circumstances in the crash. And this marks 4 years since her untimely demise. The fatal boat crash unraveled much of what began to be shown as the financial fraud and empire of crime. The docuseries devotes more than half its airtime to telling the story of Mallory Beach, who died in a boat incident during which Paul Murdaugh, also 19 at that exact time, crashed into the bridge, hurling her overboard into the water. The narrative presented in the show relies heavily on heart-wrenching interviews with Beach's family and friends, including Morgan Dottie, who was dating Paul Murdaugh and who describes him as a troubled and entitled young man prone to intoxication at times. After the crash, and while Mallory Beach was missing, the Murdaugh family sprang into action to pull the strings as necessary to protect Paul, even appearing to frame his friend Connor Cook as the driver. The narrative is corroborated in part by reporting by Mandy Matney, a local journalist who has since now been known to be the original reporter on scene at the incident and whose podcast about the family is credited with bringing the story to the masses. The tragic story of the boat crash and Mallory Beach's untimely demise also includes the traumatic impact it had on a group of teenagers, as well as the way they were spotlighted under the weight of the Murdaugh name in the local area. But by weighing it so heavily within the series, the murders that many assumed would be central to the docuseries are largely lost in this story. Maggie and Paul Murdaugh are not presented in the most flattering of light. By the time it gets to describing their murder, viewers have sat through 1.5 episodes of people detailing how they were wronged by Murdaughs. It is hard to tell whether the show experts or whether the show itself expects viewers to care about the murders themselves because 2 people lost their lives, or feel that some type of karmic justice is served. Regardless, it certainly backs the hypothesis that Alex Murdaugh is behind these documentaries. According to The Independent, filming for the documentary wrapped up just before the trial. Here are 7 of the key pieces of information discovered. What happened on that day? Episode 2 of the Netflix series is titled Murder at Moselle, but 1/2 of the way through the episode is when it's mentioned. The narrative jumps from speculation about the stress the family was undergoing following the boat crash and the ghoulish reconstruction of Murdaugh walking around after they had passed. During the trial, however, more detail about that day emerged. Firstly, Jeannie Seckinger, the CEO of Murdaugh's family law practice, testified that on June 7th, 2021, hours before the murders, she confronted Murdaugh about $792,000 in missing legal fees from their partners. While the documentary suggested an unraveling of the Murdaugh finances was due to the boat crash primarily, trial testimony suggests that the law firm was already looking into inconsistencies of fraud surrounding Murdaugh's many cases. Seckinger testified that the conversation was cut short when Murdaugh received a phone call telling him his father, who was in the hospital, was terminal at the time. Other witnesses corroborated the story that Murdaugh learned of his father's condition that day. According to a text message Maggie sent her housekeeper Bianca Turbiat Simpson, Murdaugh requested she come home to Moselle, where everything occurs, as opposed to staying at the beach house where she preferred to be that summer. Subsequent text messages indicate she was concerned about Murdaugh's welfare when she decided to return to the Moselle property once again. Alex Murdaugh called 911 right before 10 p.m. rolls on June 7th, reporting about his wife and son being shot. Thanks in part as well to body cam footage of the interviews and cell phone records, law enforcement testimony as well, much of what Murdaugh did from that moment is documented and plays a part in the case against him. After 7 minutes, Murdaugh hangs up the 911 call, stating that he needs to call family, and calls his brother, Randy, and John Marvin, trying to call Paul's friend, Rogan Gibson, with whom Paul was in communication with at that exact time. Murdaugh's remaining son, Buster, does not receive a call from his father until 10:44 that night, according to records. Bizarrely, this is after Alex Murdaugh opened a group text message called a videographer that he did not know and appeared to Google Whaley's Edisto Island, a Whaley's Edisto, which is a restaurant in the beach town where the Murdaughs were renovating the new house. At 11:47 p.m., South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, arrived on scene and interviewed Mr. Murdaugh. The interview is what shows Alex Murdaugh making various statements that will later be used against him, including that he tried to turn Paul's body over despite having no visible blood, and that he last saw his wife and son hours before the murder takes place. A Netflix documentary reports that Mr. Murdaugh was arrested for the murders but does not interrogate anything that leads to this point. On the parade of SLED agents and affiliated professionals who testified over the course of the prosecution's month-long case, the defense attorneys poke holes in the testimony, in particular highlighting errors in securing the crime scene early on. Law enforcement acknowledged they had a warrant to search the house where the murders occurred the day after they happened, but chose not to execute it as there were a lot of people there that would be displaced. But it was the cross-examination of lead investigator David Owen by defense lawyer Jim Griffin, which finally left onlookers with the most questions they had had. Firstly, Owen acknowledged that a detailed search was not undertaken in the area between Moselle, where the murders occur, and Murdaugh's official parents' home, where he went that evening. Nor was Murdaugh's parents' house searched for the as-yet undiscovered weapon, or potential weapon, as well as bloody clothes or paraphernalia. Secondly, Griffin used the opportunity to tell the jury about a controversial blood spatter report to argue a rush to judgment by L.E. The t-shirt that Murdaugh was wearing when he says he discovered the bodies appeared to have no visible blood on it at the time. Of course, we now know, folks, that those clothes were being handled by someone who may well turn out to be Nathan Tootin, because he did a lot of favors directly at that area with Maggie. However, Sled actually took the shirt to the former police officer who runs a forensic consulting company from his home, where he conducted what the defense equates to science fair experiments before issuing these reports. The first stated there were no stains consistent with blood spatter, and the second stated there were 100 stains that actually contained blood. Thirdly, Owen acknowledged that Sled was told that Murdaugh was spending $50,000 a week on opioids, allegedly, which he was buying from a gang in the area who was not investigated. Owen's cross-examination revealed inaccuracies in his prior testimony to the state's grand jury, which some onlookers may interpret as a sign that Murdaugh never should have been indicted, all of which has been absent from the Netflix documentary. The docuseries devotes 10 minutes of its last episode to the September 4th, 2021 roadside incident, a strange tale. In Murdaugh's story that he tried to stage his own demise in a suicide plot in order for his son Buster to get the life insurance bond, it has been treated with skepticism, especially after Curtis Eddie Smith claimed it was a setup. However, two details from that day emerged during the trial. While they don't offer answers, they are important pieces to finding out what happened. Firstly, Murdaugh's former close friend Chris Wilson testifies that on September 3rd, he had been told by Alex Murdaugh's law firm partners that Murdaugh had been stealing funds. Mr. Wilson had worked with Murdaugh in various cases in which Murdaugh has been accused of misappropriating the funds. Wilson said that evening he called Murdaugh to tell him what he had heard, and they agreed to meet. Wilson testified that on the morning of September 4th, hours before Murdaugh would call 911 saying he had been shot by a stranger, he confronted him about the accusations. He said Murdaugh broke down and told him he had been addicted to opioids and admitted he stole from the clients that they represented. Secondly, Murdaugh's housekeeper, Bianca Turabat Simpson, testifies on September 4th, Murdaugh asked her to send him a photo of his medical insurance card, telling her he was trying to schedule routine medical checks. However, Murdaugh says he was planning to use it to stage his demise. Two crucial witnesses throughout the trial were Murdaugh housekeeper Bianca Turabat Simpson and caregiver Musha Shelley Smith, who worked for Murdaugh at that exact time. Smith testified that she was at Murdaugh's parents' house when he visited the night of the murder, before he said he discovered Maggie and Paul's bodies. So what I'll say to that is the medical insurance card should have been taken by someone, Sled or hopefully the detectives, because it's a piece of hard evidence. There will be no reason for Alex Murdaugh to have collected a health insurance, card or medical card that's specific like that, unless it was being used for some type of plot, perhaps to stage his own demise or to do himself in or something in that regard. There's a reason when you collect a piece of hard evidence like a medical insurance card, especially when it comes to this. During Turabat Simpson's testimony, she stated she had a conversation with Murdaugh around 2 months after the murder in which he said he was wearing vineyard vines. When asked how she interpreted this statement, she stated, "I know what he was wearing the day he left the house and was confused by it. I also asked that if that was the shirt he was wearing that day earlier." In a shocking twist, however, 24 hours after the release of the documentary, Murdaugh took the stand and waived his Fifth Amendment rights. Murdaugh's testimony rendered the Maggie and Paul elements of the documentary outdated, as Murdaugh, questioned by lawyer Jim Griffin, attempted to explain inconsistencies. He addressed accusations that he tried to stage a cover-up in the boat case, claiming they were untrue. Murdaugh denied the murders, emphatically responding no, delivered while waving guns in the courtroom, asking him whether he shot his wife and his son. What was the motive? The show highlights that the family was under immense pressure due to the fallout from the boat crash, as well as the insurance settlements, which led to Paul being criminally charged and the family sued in court. The prosecution argued that the murders were an attempt to distract from the investigation into finances. An outlandish suggestion at first, but a crucial one, as it allowed evidence of financial crimes to be entered. However, during the prosecution's case, there has been minimal evidence to suggest Murdaugh would benefit from their death financially. Critical testimony established that Murdaugh's father was in terminal condition. Neither the prosecution nor the Netflix documentary is obliged to provide a motive. So, and I'll say with that, it's fairly certain and clear by the evidence, not by opinions anymore, but by the evidence, that the motive had to do with the boat case and the kind of insurance scandal around the boat case. It set something off, in Alex, and understandably, something occurs around that where he most certainly reacted or overreacted in some fashion. So that can explain the motive, the fact that there's a lot of the opioid pills there, and also of the insurance schemes around the boat case. There was a lot of insurance schemes and insurance fraud that people were never told about in the trial for some reason, that deal directly with the boat case. And that's what's interesting. Thank you again. Longtime friend of South Carolina attorney Alex Murdaugh faces 18 charges involving theft of more than $3 million in insurance bonds from the Satterfield estate for the housekeeper. An indictment officially made public accuses Cory Fleming, from originally PMPED, of working with Murdaugh to defraud the sons of Gloria Satterfield, who died in a fatal fall accident at the Murdaugh estate in 2018. Fleming wrote himself checks from Satterfield's official estate to pay for his mortgage, credit card, tax payments, even video games and other purchases, the prosecutors state in the court filing. The sons stated in the suit that they never got any of the money from the Satterfield settlement. They stated Murdaugh convinced them at their mother's funeral to use Fleming, Cory Fleming, as their attorney and sue him for wrongful death, without disclosing that Fleming had been the roommate of Murdaugh at the time during the issues over at the law firm. According to the indictment, Fleming, age 53, chose not to tell Satterfield's sons about two settlements he secured for insurers due to other concerns related to the boat crash. He instead knowingly moved money from both agreements to a fraudulent bank account Murdaugh had named similarly to handle settlements. Fleming previously stated that he was helping the son's new lawyer and maintained he was not a willing participant in the Murdaugh scheme and was used deliberately. However, Chris Wilson testifies, that the opposite was true. Cory Fleming and Murdaugh were working together at the time, just really to do some underhanded things, with stealing everything from the estate and stealing everything from these families. Deborah Barbler, the attorney for Cory Fleming, stated in their official statement that Fleming was disappointed by the charges and that he will be defending himself on these charges. Fleming plans to turn himself in before the virtual bond hearing is scheduled. So again, it's quite unfortunate, but that's just the start of it. We then have Eric Bland and Ronnie Richter, who are attorneys for the Satterfield sons, and they also got defrauded in some way. Meaning Murdaugh, allegedly, from what's coming out from the evidence, also stole from them. And he kind of admits it. When he testifies in court, he kind of admits to doing that. Because he was the one who did that. Makes sense that he admits, he had some guilt about it. Grand jurors issued 4 new charges. He faces 75 state charges, including trust, forgery, money laundering, computer crime, and criminal conspiracy with Cory Fleming, accusing him of stealing $8.5 million intended for victims in the wrongful death and insurance settlement claims on the Gloria Satterfield estate and other issues. Mr. Murdaugh was in jail, and the judge set the bail for $7 million in the bond. He has pinned his problems on drug addictions as well, which makes sense. When you are addicted, it's not an easy life, folks. His legal troubles were revealed after Maggie and son, Paul, age 22, were killed in the terrible shooting that happened at Moselle in June. Mr. Murdaugh's great-grandfather and father were all elected prosecutors in Hampton County, where his family law firm bore the Murdaugh moniker until recently. South Carolina Supreme Court has suspended Murdaugh and family from practicing law in the state. So they really went all out with this insurance scheme. Almost like they got so caught up in the power of it, felt like they could not ever get caught. And all of the money, traces back to that fake slush fund that was also representing certain victims dealing with the boat case. And it's just, it's quite something. You're going to see interesting things related to the financial documents. Seen for the first time on this channel, for sure. Thank you again. A very good job of explaining some of that element. However, on this channel, we've covered a lot more in depth what that element, truly dealt with. The boat case dealt with a lot of financial settlements that Alex was understandably very upset about. He may have just, gotten very upset and overreacted, and that would be essentially the real personal motive. But it's more difficult to explain until you look at what actually happened when Paul had the incident that occurred around the boat and the different settlements, some of which never got paid out with the actual boat. And it's interesting because it confirms Murdaugh stole from the Satterfields, and then there was the publicity on the Satterfield settlement. He convinced Chris Wilson to send him Ferris's fees, where Mark Tinsley was seeking $10 million from Alex on the boat insurance claim. There was a motion hearing scheduled for the boat case again for May 25th, and the Ferris fees check was found officially never used by Jeannie Seckinger. And of course, that would explain other things of how Nathan, most certainly got into the picture there. No question. Alex had been talking about the restructuring of the fees, and the firm suspected him of hiding assets during the boat case. On June 7th, he was in his office when Jeannie Seckinger confronted him about the Ferris fees, and he gets news that his father, Randolph, is in the hospital. Alex most certainly lost it and murdered Maggie and Paul on that night. The forensic timeline states that Alex was at the scene, where the use of family weapons corroborates that, as well as the lies that would come out. Everything that caused the pressure on Alex goes away when Maggie and Paul are removed from the picture, because the boat case also goes away. Or at least in Alex's mind, for the most part, the boats, disappear. Alex borrowed $250,000 from a law partner and $350,000 from Palmetto State Bank. Jeannie discovered these checks, as well as the fake forge account, and Alex's paralegal finds the cashed Ferris check itself. Chris Wilson then confronts him on September 4th about the trust account and $195,000 for the personal money to cover aspects of the boat settlement claim. PMPED removes Alex from the staff, and the side of the road shooting incident occurs at that time. So again, very interesting, but there are other important questions related to Satterfield for sure. Thank you again, folks. Always appreciate it. Sound off in the comments. What are your thoughts about really what was going on with the boat, the boat case itself? Thank you. This has been a short and very eye-opening and interesting history of the Alex Murdaugh empire, the Murdaugh legacy and dynasty. Most certainly, there were scandals on occasion in this family's long history. However, nothing that would ever approach the magnitude that's been uncovered, most certainly recently. So I just desired you guys to be able to get a sense of that and get a real feel for what has occurred and what's gone on for a long time. And in some of these videos that are coming up, you'll see some of the records, you'll see some of the actual court records for the settlement scheme and how they pulled off a 3-card Monte style settlement scheme. It's always about the money. Greed is what does all of us in certain cases. And that's really no different here. But when you see the kind of conniving actions that certain people did to each other, makes you really wonder about certain things dealing with the legal profession and how we can truly build up very, very sound standards and ethics, standards that people will, always strive to follow and meet. Thank you again. And always, let your comments be known and sound off with more of your thoughts and ideas down below.